Welcome back to the Eyes Wide Open podcast. I am Isaac Lidsky, host of the podcast and the author of the New York Times best-selling book by the same name, Eyes Wide Open. I'm so glad we found each other. Thanks for listening. If you're listening to the podcast and you're interested, there's a video version as well, which you can check out at my website, lidsky.com/blog. That's L as in Larry, I, D as in David, S as in Sam, KY/blog. Today, I'm speaking with Jordan Harbinger. Jordan is simply one of the best there is when it comes to this very medium, podcast interviews. He has, over 11 years, interviewed dozens, hundreds, probably thousands of remarkable people, and he's great at it. For me, being relatively new to this whole world of podcasting, it's a real pleasure to have Jordan on the show, to chat with him about his experiences, to see if he has some advice for me, and to talk about his new exciting venture, the Jordan Harbinger Show. He has a brand new podcast that's 100% him. That's the brand, Jordan Harbinger Show. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. Without further ado. Jordan, thank you for joining us. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on the show. When I heard you had a podcast, I was pretty excited because I figured this would be something that you are naturally really good at. And I put natural in air quotes because I don't think anyone's naturally good at anything, but I know the skill set you've built over the past several years. So I'm excited.
Well, thank you. I agree with you that this myth of people being naturally good at things is just that, a myth. But I'm not sure I agree with you on my ability as a podcast interviewer. But I'm certainly enjoying it, and it's certainly a treat to have you on the show, you being one of the folks who's been most successful in this medium of video interviews and online podcasts, and someone who has, in some respects, kind of reinvented yourself, started over in a sense just recently. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So when I first, it's funny that you should frame it as a reinvention, because when I first started the show, I was in law school, which you're familiar with.
Yes.
And I started it as a hobby. It used to be called I was the host of a show called The Art of Charm. And then I ran that for 11 years, all through my law career, which was like 1 year. and then I kept running it. And people were like, wow, it's so cool that you reinvented yourself after law school / during law school. And now I find myself in a situation again with the Jordan Harbinger Show, where I'm no longer hosting The Art of Charm, but I'm hosting this new show. And it was unexpected. You know, I was negotiating a split from my company, and I just ended up starting, due to the details that we won't get into here, starting a brand new show with the Jordan Harbinger Show. And it's something I never thought I would have to do. And it's both scary and exciting, but mostly scary. You know how when people start businesses, they're like, I'm terrified and I'm excited, but mostly excited. I'm terrified and excited, but mostly terrified.
Mostly
so
terrified,
I'm just gonna,
yeah.
Because I was at a couple of months ago, I was at the top of the podcast mountain. It was one of the most popular shows in the world. And I was like, wow, I've really, made it to the top of this. This is great. I really love what I'm doing. And now starting over, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out how to rebuild this audience.
Yes.
And it's confusing in a way, because when you find yourself looking at the top of a mountain that you thought you kind of already climbed and wouldn't have to climb again, you wonder, or I wonder, I should say, after 11 years of being a host on another show, it's like, did I lose a part? It sounds melodramatic right now, but
Right.
I'm telling you, did I lose a part of myself? Am I still the same person? Is my identity still the same? Because I had my identity wrapped in so much with being the host of this big show, and now I'm the host of a show that's rapidly growing. Thank goodness, but nowhere near the size of my previous show. And I'm like, wait a minute, am I important? Am I the same person? Do I have the same identity? Do I have the same skills? Like, is my network real? Are my friends real? It's, I have to reach out to all of them for help, and I've been pleasantly surprised there. Thank goodness, because I was ready. People hit a tragedy, they go, well, you find out who your friends are, and I'm like, oh
exactly.
No, that's gonna happen to me. And what I'll tell you is, in my situation, I found out who my friends were, and there are far more, and they are far more generous and giving than I ever could have possibly imagined. It's very humbling, and it's making me want to be a better person. Whereas my prediction was, this is going to be one of those pro athlete moments where it's like you find out who your friends are, and he's sitting alone on the couch,
Right.
during his ESPN interview, and you just go, oh my God, all his friends they were just all fake. And I'm like, I had the opposite. All my people I barely know are like, no, I really want to help you, and they're bending over backwards, and that's been a gift that I would never have gotten or even known about had I never had this hardship. Would I trade it? Sure, I'd love to be cruising still, but it's pretty great so far to see what's happening. The cliche that these gifts come out of tragedy
Sure.
is really true, and I didn't really believe that.
Well,
before.
it's remarkable for you and I to be speaking about that again. I mean, in
Yeah.
a sense, that's a question I often wonder about. Insights and learning and wisdom and growth. That comes out of adversity. One of the questions I get a lot from my writing and work. In fact, I think it's something we even talked about. When I was back on your shows, do you need to go through these adversities, these challenges yourself personally to truly sort of gain these insights? I think it's fascinating to hear you talk about it. You being someone who has interviewed literally hundreds, thousands of
at least
1,000 people who have all, I'm sure, have along the way given you all sorts of great insights on fear and change and the illusion of control and all those things. And yet, until you're living it, it's something different, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this sounds so cliche and obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. You really don't know what's going to happen until you experience it for yourself. And people are like, yeah, I roll, I get it. But as an interviewer, I remember asking you, would you something along the lines of, would you trade everything you've learned through the process of losing your sight to be able to see again? And you didn't hesitate for 1 second. You're like, absolutely not. I learned all this other stuff. And I thought, yeah, but really, that was my thought in the back of my head, because I never really thought, okay, well, you can get these gifts from tragedy, but are they ever really better than just not having had it in the first place? And I'll tell you right now, being at sort of the bottom of the well and restarting, really, this is very recent for me and fresh. It's a really unfortunate and stressful experience. I still see the gifts coming out of this, and I still do think, all cliches and making myself feel better aside, that in a year, like everyone says, this is going to be the best thing that ever happened to me, because I already see the friendship and the brand growing and my fans being excited for the Jordan Harbinger Show and people moving over from the old show and just having no strings attached to this old brand that I had outgrown. And I thought, I've had to ask myself those questions. Am I just saying this stuff to make myself feel better? And it's a hard process to separate the emotion from the event. And I can honestly say that after a lot of reflection that is, of course, continuing, that, this is something that is making me stronger and is very much an interesting process, because, and not just, well, it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger, but having to grind again, like I'm 27 instead of 37, and having to reach out to a network that I didn't have before. I never would have made this kind of push to my network, friends, and connections had I not just been forced to do so.
Sure.
Because it's a lot of effing work, man, but it's now that I'm doing it, I'm like, wow, okay, this is going to be the momentum that I build that carries me for the next several years.
Well, someone a lot smarter than me said, nothing worth doing is easy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but it sure feels true right now. It sure feels true right now.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, Jordan, I'm fascinated, with the new show, the Jordan Harbinger Show, and just kind of thinking back on sort of some of the things. Your expertise seems largely to have been sort of in the realm of social dynamics, right? And essentially how we effectuate our best selves through the relationships, through the way that we interact with and influence others. Is it fair to kind of point to that as a sort of overarching theme or interest of yours in many phenomenal interviews you've done?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I started off talking about dating and relationships in my 20s because I don't have to explain why, right? Everybody knows why. And, now I'm married. I've been in a relationship for 5 years with the same gal. I don't plan on changing that anytime soon. And so obviously I outgrew that subject, but I didn't really outgrow the psychology of what makes people tick. So when I look at the people that I interview, I've taken a completely different tack with the interviews, of course, in the past several years. And of course, on the Jordan Harbinger Show, it's a completely different animal. I don't have to shoehorn everything into the old business model.
Sure.
So I do really like to, for example, on Feedback Friday, I read emails from listeners and I give advice similar to maybe you grew up with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla and those guys. And I'm a regular on their show now, and it's kind of cool to have that come full circle. And I do deep dives on subjects like learning how to cope with instability or creating a new network when you've moved to a new city, that kind of thing. And of course, also trying to get great information and interviews out of people that maybe have stories but aren't used to telling them,
Yeah.
or are used to telling them in a way that's a news media soundbite kind of thing, but doesn't really have something to teach the audience. And the show, the Jordan Harbinger Show, and me personally are all about teaching things to people that listen. I'm one of those guys who, and you're probably very similar. If I'm listening to a podcast or a radio show or a book, if I'm not learning something, I feel like itchy, right? I'm like, oh, I'm wasting my time. I got to be grinding and doing something. So every episode of the show, of the Jordan Harbinger Show, has some lessons. And I don't mean metaphorical stuff, but I mean like, right now, take out your notebook and write this, or right now, make sure that your family and you do this, the following three things. That is the sort of density that we're going for. And I get that from trying to read people for my entire life and trying to dig into the social influence and social dynamics, because I think that those soft skills, those people skills, are what young people need to succeed in the workplace and what older people need to succeed in their workplace and in life. Because when you're first starting a job, you're pretty much as qualified as everyone else, or I should say unqualified as everyone else. The only thing that makes you different would be your soft skills. And when you're older, you might be stuck in middle management, or you might be an entrepreneur and trying to run your business. But if you can't create that network and create connections around you that want to support you, you're going to face this sort of limitation. And I'm seeing the benefits of that network now, being forced to call on it myself. And so now I'm really leaning into that particular skill set, which is creating great relationships around you with people that are going to have your back, as well as just interviewing fascinating people so that we can get their stories in a way that's teachable and learnable for the audience. And I think that there's just not enough. You can never have enough of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So any thoughts, any wisdom, any advice for some of us newer podcast interviews on how you get to those nuggets with folks? How do you kind of scrape away some more of the superficial stuff or canned stuff and kind of get to more of the authentic material?
Yeah, so there's a couple of strategies that I've been using over the past few years. I'm glad we're talking about interviewing, because I really do love this topic. Over the past couple of years, I better love it after 11 years. One strategy, which is the less desirable but more simple strategy, is I don't know what you would call this, but it's basically exhaust them. It's sort of like smoking them out, right? Exhausting them, which is, I'll give you an example. I was speaking to this FBI agent years ago, and every question I asked, she just had a soundbite, because she'd just gotten through her massive year-long media tour.
Sure.
I finally got to her book. And for 45 minutes, she was just cruising on autopilot. And my producer and I were like, okay, at some point, she's got to answer these real questions. And then I could tell she was getting tired.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I think we're going to finally get it. And then we had a real conversation for the following 45 minutes. But that was a 90-minute interview of which we used half. So that strategy is kind of like boxing. Yeah. You don't really want to be in a boxing ring with somebody for 10 rounds if you can finish it in 3, right? So I don't look at my interviews as adversarial, but apparently sometimes they are. But the other strategy that I think is more interesting and more effective, but requires a lot more experience, is I do a lot of prep for my interviews. Sure. I'll read every book that the person has written, or at least their latest couple of books. I take notes on that book. I look on their Wikipedia. I look at their blog. I look at their social media, and I find personal things about them. So now I start the interview in a way that doesn't really ask for sound bites. It doesn't really even allow for sound bites. So if I were to interview that FBI agent again, I might say, oh, I saw you went to Belize on vacation, by their Facebook profile or even their LinkedIn or something like that. And they would go, oh yeah, it's so great. We really love scuba diving. So we love going to Belize. And I might say, well, is it dangerous there? I've seen some documentaries, and I'll get on to the small talk part of this. And they're thinking, oh, this is going to get cut off. And it might. Usually it gets edited out. Yeah. But then I might say, so don't you have a hyper sense of awareness, being in a country that's a little sketchy, but you having worked for 27 years in the FBI, you can't just turn that off. Now we're talking about their personal thought process based on personal events. They can recall how they felt a couple of weeks ago. So I want to get down to feelings, and I want to get down to stories that they did not write in their book that involve feelings. And then we can go into stuff that they've selected in their book, right? Where you had that whole thing where you lost that big business and you were under all this stress. That was a great story, but I don't want to start there because then you're just like, story number 1 from the book, story number 2 from the book. I want to start with something where you feel like you're talking with a friend, even though we're just on Skype at that point in time, or maybe we're not even looking at each other, just audio only.
That's interesting. So you start the conversation, you set the context and the feel of it with subject matter that's maybe not at the core, and then kind of with that vibe, you kind of move into some of the more substance stuff.
I move into the substance stuff, but I don't let them I don't let them get into autopilot mode again. And you can tell when that's happening because someone will say, yeah, I did work for 27 years in the FBI and I really couldn't turn it off, when I was in Belize because da-da-da. And then they'll go, and they'll flip to a story from the book. And since I've read the book, I smell it coming, right? Yeah. And I go, okay, if they're going to tell this story from the book, I'm going to skip to that part in my notes. And if I have to, interrupt the story if they're getting too detailed or not detailed enough and just jump right into a question, because otherwise they're going to say, oh, here's a story I've told 38 times in the past 6 months. I'm just going to tell it in the exact same words that I always do.
That's right.
And that autopilot, you can tell by the cadence of someone's voice. You can tell if you've read their book and they're telling the same story using they're making the same jokes they put in the book. I mean, you know how this goes with a book tour. And that autopilot, I want to sort of let the air out of that balloon every time I see it more than, let's say, half inflated. You don't want to keep people so uncomfortable that they don't know what the heck is going on during the interview, but you want to keep people on their toes enough, or I should say, you want to keep them relaxed enough so that they don't go, oh, crap, I've been quiet for too long. Let me tell this story about the time I lost my construction business. You don't want them to – because that autopilot, that's comfortable. And this happens in job interviews. This happens in social situations. People will run to their default because they're like, oh, crap, I haven't said anything in 38 seconds on this date. She's going to think I'm weird. Let me start talking about work, and it's like, what am I doing? And you just can't stop yourself. That's what I'm trying to stay away from in the interviews and just make people feel so relaxed that they're talking about their stinking Belize vacation, scuba diving, and then we'll get into the drama, right?
Sure. So what's a good question that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you, Jordan?
That's a great question too. That I've also relied on in the past. What I would say, geez, you're making me do all the work now.
Well,
speaking of not going on autopilot, I don't really have anything that I think you should have asked me because I don't know your goal for the show other than to have an interesting conversation. I've watched several of your interviews, of course, with people that I know. Celeste Headley, always a win too.
Sure.
Good selection there. So it's hard for me to say. I think the questions that people, quote unquote, have to ask are what your audience wants to hear. When I interview, I'm very rarely thinking. I should say I'm 40% or 30% thinking, what do I want to know? Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to astrally project, or whatever you call it, myself into the brains of the hive mind of the Jordan Harbinger Show listener. Because sure, I might really be curious about this random thing, and I might ask that question, oh, how long have you been scuba diving? But really, I'm curious, well, wait a minute. If you were in the FBI, have you ever had to chase somebody that's famous? Or what kind of cases, you catch caught mobsters? What was the scariest point in your life? Don't you worry about them coming after you? I'm trying to think of what the audience wants to know. And it's a game you can't win because there's 100,000 of them and one of me. But the closer I can get to asking the questions that everybody wants to hear and getting an answer that's interesting, delivered in a way that the guest is comfortable with, that's what I'm looking for. So
100,000 people, or in my case, Jordan, it's my mom and sisters listening.
Well, to the podcast. Hello, Lidsky family.
Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Lidsky family, yeah. Which might be a good place for us to leave it for now. I'd love to do this again. I am a huge fan of yours.
Thank you.
It's kind of you to take the time to speak with me so that my entire family can hear.
I appreciate it. No, I came here to see you and for them to address the Lidsky clan. So mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished, Jordan.
Yes. We'll put a banner behind me next time. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jordan as much as I did, he's awesome. I hope you'll check out his show, The Jordan Harbinger Show. I'm sure it is soon to be back at the top of the heap in terms of the podcast rankings. I want to hear from you. If you have anything to share with me about this episode or any other episode or what Eyes Wide Open means to you in your life, please reach out to me. Best way to do that is visit my website, lidsky.com, L as in Larry, I, D as in David, S as in Sam, KY.com. I read every single submission and I want to hear from you. Most important, please remember to live and lead eyes wide open. Until next time, I'm Isaac Lidsky. Thank you.